The scorching Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on Mesquite Ridge as Elena Morrison balanced another tray of whiskey glasses, her calloused hands trembling slightly from exhaustion. The dusty Rose Saloon reeked of stale tobacco, unwashed bodies, and spilled liquor, a suffocating mixture that had become her daily reality for the past 6 months. "Eleanor, table 4 needs another bottle." Jeremiah Blackwood's gravelly voice cut through the afternoon din like a whip crack. The portly saloon owner stood behind the bar, his cold grey eyes tracking her every movement like a predator, watching wounded prey. She nodded silently, not trusting her voice. Speaking up had earned her a bruised jaw last week when she dared to ask for a half-day to visit her husband's grave. The purple marks had finally faded, but the memory of Blackwood's meaty fist remained fresh. At table 4, 3 dust-covered miners leered at her as she set down their bottle. One of them, a gap-toothed man with tobacco stains on his shirt, grabbed her wrist as she turned to leave. "Now hold on there, darling. How about you sit with us a spell?" His grip tightened, and Elena felt panic rise in her chest. "Please, I have other customers." "Blackwood won't mind." "Will you, Jeremiah?" The miner's voice carried across the saloon. Blackwood barely glanced up from counting coins. "Elena knows her job. Keep the customers happy." The words hit her like a physical blow. 6 months ago, she'd been Elena Morrison, respected wife of rancher Thomas Morrison. Now she was simply Elena, property of the Dusty Rose, with no last name that mattered and no rights that anyone felt obligated to respect. The miner's companions chuckled as he pulled her closer. "See? Boss says you're supposed to keep us happy." Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd endured their grabbing hands, their crude comments, their assumptions about what services she might provide beyond serving drinks. But she'd drawn the line at anything more, no matter how Blackwood pressured her. "I serve drinks, nothing more," she said firmly, trying to pull away. The miner's grip tightened until she winced. "Maybe it's time you learned some new skills." "Let her go." The voice was quiet, but carried absolute authority. Every head in the saloon turned toward the batwing doors, where a tall Apache warrior stood silhouetted against the blazing afternoon sun. He wore traditional buckskin pants and a cotton shirt, with silver conchos gleaming on his belt. His long black hair was tied back with a leather cord, and his dark eyes swept the room with the calm assessment of a man who feared nothing. The saloon fell silent, except for the tick of the grandfather clock in the corner. Eleanor had heard whispers about this man. Naalnish, they called him, though the white folks usually just said that Apache scout. He worked sometimes with the cavalry, translating during prisoner exchanges, but his loyalties remained a mystery that made everyone nervous. The miner's hand fell away from Elena's wrist as if burned. "This ain't your concern, Apache." Naalnish stepped into the saloon, his moccasins silent on the wooden floor. "I have business with Blackwood. The woman serves drinks, not entertainment." "You got no right," the miner began, but Blackwood cut him off. "That's enough, Henderson." The saloon owner's voice carried warning. "Apache, state your business." Naalnish moved to the bar, his presence somehow making the crowded saloon feel smaller. Elena found herself studying his face, weathered by sun and wind, with high cheekbones and eyes that seemed to see everything. There was something in his expression when he'd looked at her, something that reminded her of her husband's protective instincts. "The cavalry holds 3 of my people," Naalnish said. "I come to arrange exchange." "That's military business, not mine." "You have influence with Colonel Wright. He listens to town council." Blackwood wiped a glass with exaggerated care. "Maybe I do. What's in it for me?" Elena watched the exchange while clearing nearby tables, fascinated despite herself. In 6 months, she'd never seen anyone speak to Blackwood as an equal. The saloon owner ruled Mesquite Ridge through fear and corruption, but this Apache warrior showed no deference whatsoever. "Information," Naalnish replied. "About water sources in the Dragoon Mountains. Your miners need water." "Interesting." Blackwood set down the glass. "I'll consider it." Elena felt Naalnish's eyes on her as she worked. When she glanced up, their gazes met briefly. In that moment, she saw something unexpected: compassion. Not pity, which would have humiliated her, but a quiet understanding of suffering that made her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "Elena!" Blackwood's sharp voice made her jump. "Take the Apache whatever he's drinking on the house." She approached the bar cautiously. Up close, Naalnish seemed even more imposing, but there was no threat in his bearing toward her. "What can I get you?" "Water," he said simply. "Please." As she filled a glass from the pitcher, he spoke quietly. "Your husband was Thomas Morrison." Eleanor's hand stilled. "You knew him?" "By reputation. He was fair man, paid honest wages to Apache who worked his cattle. Tears threatened, but Elena blinked them back. Thomas had been one of the few ranchers who'd employed Apache cowboys, believing that good work deserved fair pay regardless of race. It had made him unpopular with some neighbors, but he'd stood by his principles. "He was," she whispered. "His death was not justice," Naalnish said. "But neither is this." He gestured subtly toward the saloon, toward her situation. Elena's cheeks burned. "I don't have a choice. When Thomas died, Mr. Blackwood showed me papers, said Thomas owed him money. The ranch barely covered half the debt." "Elena," Blackwood's voice cracked like a whip, "stop chattering and get back to work." She set down the water glass, her hands shaking slightly. Naalnish's fingers brushed hers as he reached for it, a brief, warm contact that somehow steadied her. "Debt can be paid in many ways," he said quietly. "Not all chains are made of iron." Before she could ask what he meant, he drank the water in one long pull and set the glass down with a soft clink. "I will return tomorrow, Blackwood. Consider my offer." As the Apache warrior walked toward the doors, Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. She didn't understand why this stranger cared about her situation or what he might be planning, but something in his manner suggested that her story wasn't over yet. The batwing doors swung shut behind him, and the saloon gradually returned to its normal chaos. But Elena found herself staring at the empty water glass, wondering if she'd imagined the quiet promise in Naalnish's eyes, or if somewhere in the vast Arizona territory, someone actually gave a damn about Elena Morrison's fate. 3 days had passed since Naalnish's first visit, and Elena found herself glancing toward the batwing doors more often than she cared to admit. The Apache warrior had kept his word to Blackwood, returning each afternoon to discuss the prisoner exchange, but their conversations had grown increasingly tense. The 4th day brought a dust storm that turned the sky the color of dried blood. Elena swept sand from the saloon floor for the 3rd time that morning, her back aching from the repetitive motion. The storm had driven more men than usual into the dusty rows, seeking shelter from the stinging wind and gritty air. "Elena, get over here!" Blackwood's voice boomed over the wind, rattling the windows. She hurried to the bar where he stood counting silver coins, his thick fingers moving with practiced efficiency. The money represented her labor. Every drink served, every crude comment endured, every humiliation swallowed, yet not a single coin would ever be hers. "Dr. Hayes wants to see you," Blackwood said without looking up. "Says you missed your appointment yesterday." Elena's stomach knotted. Dr. Samuel Hayes was the only person in Mesquite Ridge who'd shown her genuine kindness since Thomas's death. He'd been treating a persistent cough that had developed from the saloon's smoky atmosphere, refusing payment despite her protests. "I couldn't leave. I said you work when I need you to work." Blackwood's pale eyes fixed on her. "But the good doctor's been asking questions around town, questions about your arrangement here. I don't like questions." Fear crawled up Elena's spine. "I've never complained to him about anything." "See that you don't. Hayes has influence with the territorial government. Last thing I need is some bleeding heart making noise about my business practices." He leaned closer, his breath reeking of whiskey. "You remember what happens to women who cause me trouble?" Elena nodded quickly, remembering the previous girl who'd worked at the Dusty Rose. Maria had tried to leave town with a traveling preacher. They'd found her body in the desert 3 days later, officially died from exposure, though the bruises on her throat suggested otherwise. The batwing doors swung open, admitting a swirl of dust and the familiar silhouette of Naalnish. He moved through the saloon with the same quiet confidence as before, but Elena sensed something different in his bearing, a coiled tension that made several patrons shift nervously in their seats. "Blackwood," the Apache warrior said, approaching the bar. "We need to talk. I told you yesterday I can't help with your prisoner situation. Colonel Wright won't listen to me. This is different." Naalnish's dark eyes found Elena's face, and she saw something there that made her pulse quicken. This is about her. The saloon grew quiet, that dangerous kind of silence that preceded violence. Elena felt every gaze in the room settle on her, and she wanted to disappear into the floor. Blackwood's hand moved closer to the shotgun he kept behind the bar. "The woman's none of your concern, Apache. She was wife to Thomas Morrison. Good man, honorable man." Naalnish's voice carried clearly through the room. "His widow deserves better than this." A miner at the nearest table laughed harshly. "Deserves? She's lucky Blackwood gave her work at all. Most folks wouldn't hire a woman whose husband got himself killed by your people." Naalnish turned his attention to the miner, and the man's laughter died abruptly. Thomas Morrison was killed by Chiricahua raiders. I am Mescalero. You see no difference. Apache is Apache, another patron called out. All the same to me. Then all white men are the same to me, Naalnish replied evenly, including those who enslave women through false debt. Blackwood's face flushed red. You watch your tongue, boy. That woman owes me legitimate money. I got papers to prove it. Papers can lie like men can lie. Eleanor's heart hammered as the confrontation escalated. She'd never seen anyone challenge Blackwood so directly, and she feared what might happen to this brave Apache warrior who seemed determined to defend her honor. What do you want? Blackwood demanded. Naalnish reached into a leather pouch at his belt and withdrew something that made the entire saloon gasp. In his palm lay a silver nugget the size of a chicken egg, its surface gleaming even in the dim light. I want to buy her freedom, he said simply. The silence stretched so long, Elena could hear her own heartbeat. Then Blackwood began to laugh, a sound like grinding rocks. You want to buy her? What kind of savage do you think I am? I think you are a man who loves money more than anything else, Naalnish replied. I offered to pay her debt, all of it, in silver. How much silver we talking about? Blackwood's greed was already overcoming his outrage. Naalnish's eyes never left the saloon owner's face. Her weight in silver, pure silver, from the mountains. Elena's knees nearly buckled. A person's weight in silver was a fortune beyond imagining. Where would an Apache warrior get such wealth, and why would he offer it for her? You're lying, Blackwood said, but his voice lacked conviction. Naalnish poured the contents of his pouch onto the bar. 6 more silver nuggets joined the first, along with several silver coins and a small silver cross. This is, how you say, down payment. Proof of good faith. The saloon erupted in whispers. Elena heard fragments of conversation. Where'd he get it? Secret Apache mine. Worth more than the whole town. But she couldn't focus on anything except the impossible scene unfolding before her. Even if you had that much silver, Blackwood said, his voice strained, why would you waste it on her? She's nothing special, just a used-up widow with nowhere else to go. Elena flinched at the cruel words, but Naalnish's expression didn't change. Every person has value. Thomas Morrison knew this, paid fair wages to Apache workers when other ranchers would not. His widow deserves honor, not bondage. This is crazy, muttered Henderson, the gap-toothed miner. Apache buying a white woman like she's a horse or something? No, Naalnish said firmly. Not buying woman, paying debt, setting free what should never have been caged. Dr. Hayes chose that moment to push through the bat-wing doors, his medical bag in hand. The elderly physician took in the scene, the silver on the bar, the tense faces, Eleanor's obvious distress, and his expression hardened. What's going on here? He demanded. Apache's offering to buy Elena's freedom, someone called out. Her weight in silver. Dr. Hayes looked from Naalnish to Blackwood to Elena. Her freedom. I was under the impression she worked here voluntarily. She does, Blackwood said quickly. This savage has some fool notion about rescuing her from imaginary bondage. Is that so? Dr. Hayes approached Elena, his kind eyes searching her face. My dear, are you here of your own free will? Elena's mouth went dry. She could feel Blackwood's threatening presence behind her, but she also saw something in Dr. Hayes's expression and in Naalnish's steady gaze that gave her courage. The debt, she began, then stopped. How could she explain the trap she'd fallen into, the papers that might be fraudulent, the threats, the gradual erosion of her dignity and hope? The debt is real, Blackwood insisted. Thomas Morrison borrowed money to keep his ranch running. When he died, the debt became his widow's responsibility. May I see these papers? Dr. Hayes asked politely. Blackwood's jaw tightened. They're private business documents. Indeed. Dr. Hayes nodded thoughtfully. Well, regardless of the debt's legitimacy, if this gentleman wishes to pay it, that should resolve the matter. He can't have that much silver, Blackwood protested. Naalnish stepped forward. Tomorrow, noon. Bring scales. Bring witnesses. I will bring silver. He looked directly at Elena. If you choose freedom. Elena stared at him, this stranger who was offering her something she'd thought lost forever. Why? She whispered. Why would you do this for me? Because it is right, he said simply. Because your husband showed respect to my people when others would not. Because no person should be owned by another. This is madness, Blackwood snarled. I won't. You will, Dr. Hayes interrupted quietly. Because if you don't, I'll be asking the territorial marshal to examine those debt papers very carefully, and I suspect they won't stand up to scrutiny. Elena saw something pass between the two men, a threat unspoken but clearly understood. Dr. Hayes had obviously suspected something was wrong with her situation, and now he had the leverage to act. Blackwood's face cycled through rage, calculation, and finally grudging acceptance. Fine, noon tomorrow. But I want to see every ounce of silver before we make any deal. Naalnish gathered his silver from the bar and secured it in his pouch. You will see it. He turned to Elena one last time. Choice is yours. No one can force you to accept freedom if you do not want it. As he walked toward the doors, Elena found her voice. Wait. He paused, looking back at her. What happens after? She asked. If you pay the debt, what happens to me then? Then you choose your own path, he said. As free woman should. The batwing doors swung shut behind him, leaving Elena standing in the suddenly quiet saloon, her mind reeling with possibilities she'd thought lost forever. Tomorrow at noon, her fate would be decided by the weight of silver against her own flesh. For the first time in months, Elena Morrison dared to hope. Dawn broke grey and cold over Mesquite Ridge, but Elena had been awake for hours, staring at the cracked ceiling of her tiny room above the saloon. Sleep had been impossible with her mind churning over yesterday's events. In just a few hours, her entire life might change. If Naalnish truly had the silver he'd promised, and if Blackwood honored the bargain. The sound of voices drifting up from the street made her rise and peer through the grimy window. Already people were gathering in small groups, their animated conversations clearly centered on the upcoming spectacle. Word had spread through town like wildfire. An Apache warrior was going to pay a white woman's weight in silver for her freedom. Elena, dressed in her cleanest dress, a faded blue calico that had once been her Sunday best. Her hands trembled as she braided her hair, trying to calm the nervous energy that made her feel like she might fly apart at any moment. A soft knock at her door made her freeze. Elena? It's Dr. Hayes. She opened the door to find the elderly physician holding a cup of coffee and a small cloth bundle. His weathered face wore a mixture of concern and determination. I brought you some breakfast, he said gently, and something else. He handed her the bundle, which revealed a bar of lavender soap and a small mirror. You should look your best today. This is about your dignity as much as your freedom. Elena's throat tightened with emotion. Doctor, I don't understand why that man would do this for me. People are saying he must want something in return. Dr. Hayes sighed, settling his bulky frame onto the room's single chair. I've been thinking about that myself. I've had dealings with Naalnish before. He's helped me treat Apache prisoners who were injured. He's not like the other warriors who come through here. He speaks perfect English, understands our ways, but he's never forgotten his own people's values. What do you mean? Among the Apache, protecting the helpless is a sacred duty, especially protecting women and children. Dr. Hayes studied her face carefully. I think he sees you as someone who deserves protection, and he has the means to provide it. Elena sank onto her narrow bed. But her weight in silver, Doctor. That's a fortune. Where would he get such wealth? There are stories, Dr. Hayes said quietly. Rumors about secret Apache mines in the mountains. Silver veins that the Mexican miners never found. If those stories are true, a commotion in the street below interrupted him. Elena rushed to the window and saw a group of Apache warriors approaching the town. 5 men, all armed, with Naalnish leading them. Behind them came a pack mule heavily laden with what appeared to be leather bags. Sweet Jesus, Dr. Hayes breathed, joining her at the window. He actually brought it. But Elena noticed something else. Armed white men emerging from buildings, positioning themselves along the street. Sheriff Morrison, no relation despite the name, stood in front of the jail with his deputies, their hands resting on their gun butts. Mayor Whitman paced nervously in front of the general store, clearly agitated by the presence of so many Apache in his town. This feels wrong, Elena whispered. Like they're planning something. Dr. Hayes's expression darkened. I'm afraid you might be right. Stay here until I come for you. After he left, Elena remained at the window, watching the tension build in the street below. The Apache warriors took positions in the town square, their leader speaking quietly with his men. They looked calm but alert, like predators who sensed danger but weren't afraid of it. Blackwood emerged from the saloon carrying a large set of scales, the kind used for weighing gold dust. He set them up on a table in the middle of the square, making a show of checking their accuracy. A growing crowd gathered around the makeshift arena, their faces reflecting a mixture of curiosity, hostility, and greed. Elena's heart sank as she recognized the setup. This wasn't just about paying her debt, It was about humiliating both her and Naalnish in front of the entire town. The thought of being weighed like a sack of grain while dozens of people watched made her stomach churn. Another knock at her door revealed Mary Catherine, the pastor's wife, holding a shawl and wearing an expression of barely contained outrage. "Elena Morrison, you cannot seriously be considering this spectacle," the woman said, bustling into the room without invitation. "It's unseemly, degrading. What would your poor Thomas think?" "Thomas would want me to be free," Elena replied quietly. "Free?" Mary Catherine's voice rose to a scandalized whisper. "Child, you'll be indebted to a savage. Who knows what he'll expect in return? There are Christian ways to handle debt, proper ways. The Christian people of this town have watched me suffer for months without lifting a finger," Elena interrupted, surprising herself with her boldness. "This savage is the first person to offer me actual help." Mary Catherine's face flushed. "I've prayed for you every Sunday. Prayer doesn't pay debts or put food on the table." Before Mary Catherine could respond, Dr. Hayes returned, his face grim. "It's time. But Elena, I need to warn you. There's trouble brewing. Some of the men are talking about not letting the Apache leave town, regardless of what happens with the silver." Elena's blood ran cold. "They mean to kill them? Or arrest them on some trumped-up charge? Either way, it won't end well." He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to go through with this. We can find another way." Elena looked out at the gathering crowd, then at the Apache warriors who had risked their lives to come here. Naalnish stood near the scales, his posture straight and proud, despite the hostile faces surrounding him. When he looked up at her window, their eyes met across the distance. In that moment, Elena understood something fundamental. This wasn't just about her debt or her freedom. It was about honor, his honor in keeping his word, and hers in having the courage to accept help when it was offered. "No," she said firmly. "I'm going down there." Dr. Hayes nodded approvingly. "Then I'll be right beside you." As they descended the stairs, Elena heard the murmur of the crowd grow louder. When they stepped through the batwing doors, a hush fell over the assembly. Elena felt dozens of eyes on her, some curious, some judgmental, some openly hostile. Naalnish approached, carrying one of the leather bags. "You came," he said simply. "I said I would consider it," Elena replied. "I've decided to accept your offer." A ripple of shock went through the crowd. Someone shouted, "She's lost her mind!" Another voice called out, "Apache witch doctor must have put a spell on her." Sheriff Morrison stepped forward, his hand on his pistol. "Now hold on there. I'm not sure this is legal. Might be some kind of slavery or something." "Slavery was paying debt," Naalnish said calmly. "This is ending slavery." Blackwood wiped sweat from his forehead despite the cool morning air. "Let's just get this over with. You brought the silver." Naalnish gestured to his companions, who began unloading the pack mule. Elena's breath caught as they revealed bag after bag of silver, nuggets, coins, and raw ore that gleamed in the morning sun. The crowd pressed closer, their greed temporarily overcoming their prejudice. "First we weigh the woman," Blackwood announced, his voice carrying across the square. "Then we see if your silver matches." Elena's cheeks burned as she approached the scales. The indignity of being weighed like livestock in front of the entire town made her want to flee. But then she saw Dr. Hayes's encouraging nod and Naalnish's steady gaze that somehow conveyed both respect and determination. As she stepped onto the platform, Elena Morrison made a choice that would change everything. She wasn't just accepting freedom. She was choosing to trust a man whose culture she'd been taught to fear, whose offer of help defied everything she thought she knew about the world. The scales settled, and Blackwood read the weight aloud. 112 pounds. Naalnish nodded and began pouring silver onto the other side of the scales. With each addition, the crowd grew more agitated. Elena could feel the tension building like a storm about to break. When the scales finally balanced, a gasp went up from the assembled townspeople. Naalnish had done it. He'd actually brought her weight in silver. But as Elena looked around at the hostile faces surrounding them, she realized their troubles were just beginning. The hardest part wasn't getting the silver. It was getting out of Mesquite Ridge alive. The scales hung in perfect balance, silver gleaming against the morning sun like captured starlight. Elena stood frozen on the platform, hardly believing that her exact weight in precious metal sat mere feet away. The crowd pressed closer, their faces a mixture of awe, greed, and growing anger. Blackwood circled the scales like a vulture, checking and rechecking the balance. His greedy eyes took in every nugget, every coin, calculating the fortune that now legally belonged to him. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. The savage actually did it. The debt is paid, Naalnish said quietly. She is free. Not so fast, Sheriff Morrison interrupted, pushing through the crowd with his deputies flanking him. I'm not sure this is legal. Might be we need to hold this silver as evidence while we investigate where it came from. Eleanor's heart sank as she recognized the trap. She should have known Blackwood wouldn't simply honor the agreement. The greed in his eyes told her he'd already decided to keep both the silver and her services. Evidence of what crime? Doctor, Hayes demanded, stepping forward. Paying a legitimate debt. Well now, Sheriff Morrison drawled, Apache ain't supposed to have this kind of wealth. Must have stolen it from somewhere, maybe from one of their mining operations up north. Naalnish's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. Silver comes from Apache land. Land that was ours before white men came. We take what is ours. That's theft, Mayor Whitman declared, having found his courage now that the sheriff was taking charge. Territorial law is clear about mining claims. Elena watched in horror as the situation spiraled beyond anyone's control. The Apache warriors behind Naalnish grew tenser, their hands drifting toward their weapons. The armed townspeople responded in kind, creating a deadly standoff in the middle of the square. This is wrong, Elena said, her voice barely audible above the crowd's murmur. What did you say? Blackwood demanded. Elena stepped down from the scales, her legs shaking but her resolve hardening. I said this is wrong. He kept his word. He brought the silver. You have to honor the agreement. I don't have to do anything, Blackwood snarled, especially not for stolen silver. You don't know it's stolen, Elena shot back. You're just afraid of losing your hold over me. The crowd stirred uneasily. Elena had never spoken back to Blackwood publicly before, and her defiance seemed to surprise everyone, including herself. Elena, Dr. Hayes said quietly, perhaps we should— No. Elena's voice grew stronger. I'm tired of being afraid, tired of being owned. If that silver pays my debt, then I'm free. That was the agreement. Henderson, the gap-toothed miner, laughed harshly. Listen to her, talking like she's got a choice. Woman, you ain't going nowhere with no Apache. It ain't natural. Natural? Elena turned to face him, months of suppressed anger finally boiling over. What's natural about forcing a widow into servitude? What's natural about treating a woman like property? You watch your tongue, Henderson warned, taking a step toward her. Naalnish moved between them with fluid grace, his hand resting on his knife hilt. You will not touch her. I'll touch whoever I damn well please, Henderson growled, reaching for his pistol. The Apache warrior's blade appeared in his hand so quickly, Elena barely saw the movement. Henderson froze, his gun half drawn, as the razor-sharp edge came to rest against his throat. No, Naalnish said softly. You will not. The square erupted in chaos. Men shouted, weapons appeared, and Elena found herself caught in the middle of a confrontation that threatened to turn deadly. The other Apache warriors had drawn their weapons, forming a protective circle around their leader and Elena. Put down your weapons, Sheriff Morrison shouted, his own pistol trained on Naalnish. All of you. After they do, one of the Apache warriors replied in accented English, gesturing toward the armed townspeople. Dr. Hayes raised his hands, trying to calm the situation. Everyone just needs to stay calm. This doesn't have to end in bloodshed. But Elena could see the hatred in the townspeople's faces, the fear and rage that had been building for months. To them, she represented something that challenged their understanding of the world. A white woman accepting help from an Apache, choosing freedom over the security of knowing her place. You want to know the truth? Elena called out, her voice carrying across the square. The truth is that this Apache warrior has shown me more respect and kindness than any white man in this town. He's offering me freedom when you would keep me enslaved. Elena, stop, Blackwood warned, but she was beyond caring about his threats. Thomas would have honored this man's offer, she continued. He would have recognized the honor in what he's doing. But you— She swept her gaze across the hostile faces. You're so filled with hate that you can't see past the color of his skin to the decency of his heart. Mayor Whitman stepped forward, his face red with indignation. That's enough. Sheriff, arrest her for disturbing the peace. And arrest him too, Henderson added, blood seeping from the shallow cut on his throat. For assault with a deadly weapon. Eleanor felt the world closing in around her. Even if Naalnish escaped, she would face charges and Blackwood would ensure she suffered for her defiance. The hope that had flickered briefly in her heart began to dim. Then she heard Dr. Hayes clear his throat. Sheriff Morrison, before you make any arrests, perhaps you should read this. The physician held up a folded document that Elena had never seen before. "I took the liberty of having a friend at the territorial courthouse examine Mr. Blackwood's debt papers. Turns out they're quite interesting." Blackwood's face went pale. "You had no right—" "I had every right to investigate what appeared to be fraudulent documents," Dr. Hayes replied smoothly. "According to the official records, Thomas Morrison paid his debt to you in full 3 months before his death. The papers you showed Elena were forgeries." The crowd murmured in shock. Elena felt the ground shift beneath her feet as the implications sank in. She had been enslaved for 6 months based on lies. "That's impossible," Blackwood blustered. "I have the original documents." "You have forgeries," Dr. Hayes said firmly, "which means Elena Morrison owes you nothing. She never did." Sheriff Morrison lowered his weapon slightly, confusion replacing authority in his expression. "If that's true, then she's been held against her will," Dr. Hayes finished, "which, I believe, is a federal crime." Elena stared at Blackwood, seeing him clearly for the first time, not just a greedy man, but a criminal who had built his power on fraud and intimidation. "You lied to me," she whispered. "You stole 6 months of my life." "I gave you work when no one else would," Blackwood protested. "I kept you fed and housed." "You kept me enslaved." Elena's voice rose to a shout. "You made me think I had no choice, no hope, no future." Naalnish slowly sheathed his knife, his dark eyes never leaving Blackwood's face. "Debt was lie, but silver is real and offer stands." Elena looked at him in confusion. "What do you mean?" "You owe no debt. You are free. But if you choose, I still offer protection. Way out of this place. A new life." He gestured toward the hostile crowd. "They will not forget your words today. You will not be safe here." Elena realized he was right. She had burned her bridges in this town, spoken truths that would make her a pariah. Even with the debt exposed as fraud, she had nowhere to go, no way to support herself. "This is madness," Mary Catherine called out from the crowd. "A white woman can't just ride off with Apache warriors." "Why not?" Elena asked, surprised by her own boldness. "If I'm truly free, then I can choose my own path." She looked at Naalnish, seeing not a savage or an enemy, but a man who had risked everything to help her, a man who had shown her more honor and respect than her own people. "What happens if I come with you?" she asked quietly. "You find out who you are when no one owns you," he replied. "You choose your own destiny." Elena nodded slowly, understanding that this moment would define the rest of her life. She could stay in Mesquite Ridge, forever marked as the woman who had defied convention, or she could step into the unknown with this Apache warrior who had already proven his worth. The choice, as Naalnish had said, was hers. "Sheriff Morrison," she said clearly, "I want to press charges against Jeremiah Blackwood for fraud and false imprisonment." Then she turned to Naalnish. "And I accept your offer of protection." The square erupted in outrage, but Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in months, the power of making her own decisions. Whatever came next, she would face it as a free woman. The dust cloud behind them stretched across the desert like a brown scar against the azure sky. Elena crouched behind a boulder outcropping, her borrowed Apache clothing already stained with sweat and grime after 2 days of hard riding. Naalnish lay flat against the rock beside her, his keen eyes studying the pursuing riders through the heat shimmer. 12 men, he said quietly, maybe more hidden by the dust. Elena's throat felt like sandpaper, despite the precious water they'd rationed carefully. The escape from Mesquite Ridge had been harrowing, a mad dash through hostile territory, while angry townspeople organized pursuit. Only Naalnish's knowledge of hidden paths and water sources had kept them ahead of their pursuers. "Will they follow us into Apache territory?" she asked. Naalnish's expression remained grim. "Blackwood leads them. Man like that, losing silver and reputation, he will risk much for revenge." Elena closed her eyes, guilt washing over her. These Apache warriors were risking their lives because of her decision to flee. She'd brought danger to people who owed her nothing, simply because one of their own had shown her kindness. "I should go back," she said suddenly. "This isn't your fight." "Too late for that," replied Chato, one of the younger warriors, in careful English. "You spoke truth in that town, made them see their shame. Now they want to erase shame by erasing you." Elena had learned the names of her protectors during their desperate flight. Besides Naalnish and Chato, there were Nantai, Geronimo's nephew, Delche, a skilled tracker, and Cochise, named for the great chief. Each man had family, responsibilities, lives that were now endangered by their decision to help her. The sound of hoofbeats echoed off the canyon walls, growing closer. Naalnish motioned for absolute silence as the riders approached their hiding place. Elena held her breath, pressing herself against the sun-heated stone. Blackwood's voice drifted up from below, harsh with frustration. "She's got to be somewhere in these rocks. Apache don't just vanish into thin air." "Maybe we should turn back," suggested another voice Elena recognized as Sheriff Morrison. "We're getting pretty deep into hostile territory." "That woman made a fool of me," Blackwood snarled. "Cost me a fortune in silver and my reputation. I ain't going home empty-handed." Elena bit her lip, tasting blood. She understood now that this pursuit wasn't really about justice or law. It was about a powerful man's wounded pride. Her defiance had exposed him as a fraud and criminal, and he couldn't let that stand. The riders moved on, following false tracks that Delche had carefully laid to lead them away from the actual trail. But Elena knew they would be back. Men like Blackwood didn't give up easily, especially when their entire identity was built on control and dominance. "We can't keep running forever," she said once the sound of hooves faded. Naalnish studied her face carefully. "What do you want to do?" The question surprised her. For 6 months, no one had asked what she wanted. Every decision had been made for her, every choice stolen by circumstances beyond her control. Now, sitting in Apache territory, with her entire world reduced to what she could carry in a saddlebag, someone was asking for her opinion. "I want to understand," she said finally. "Why did you really help me? And don't say it was just honor or debt to my husband. There's something more." Naalnish was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes distant. "My sister," he said finally, "taken by Mexican slavers when she was 16, sold to wealthy family in Mexico City. I searched for her for 3 years. Elena's heart clenched. "Did you find her?" "Found where she had been, house where they kept her. But she was gone." His voice remained steady, but Elena could hear the pain beneath. "Senora told me she had died of fever, but the way she said it, I knew it was lie. My sister died of despair, of having no hope, no choice." "I'm sorry," Elena whispered. "When I saw you in that saloon serving men who treated you like nothing, it was like seeing her again, seeing what she might have endured." Naalnish looked directly at her. "I could not save my sister, but I could save you." The simple honesty of his words broke something open in Elena's chest. She understood now that their connection transcended culture or race. They were both people who had lost everything and found each other in the ruins. "There's something else you should know," Naalnish continued. "The silver I used to pay your debt it wasn't from any mine." Elena frowned. "Where did it come from?" "My grandfather was shaman, holy man. Before he died, he told me about hidden cash, silver and gold gathered over generations, saved for time of great need." Naalnish's eyes held hers. "I believed your need was great enough." Elena stared at him, overwhelmed. "You used your people's sacred treasure? For me? Treasure has no value if it cannot purchase freedom," he replied simply. Chateau appeared at the edge of their hiding place, moving silently despite the rocky terrain. "Riders are circling back. And there are others coming from the north." Naalnish cursed softly in Apache. "How many from the north?" "Maybe 8. Different horses, different tracks. Could be cavalry." Elena's stomach dropped. If the army was involved, it meant their situation had escalated beyond a simple pursuit. Federal troops chasing Apache warriors, who had kidnapped a white woman, would create the kind of incident that could spark renewed warfare. "This is my fault," Elena said. "I should never have chosen freedom," Naalnish interrupted. "Should have stayed slave to protect feelings of weak men. People could die because of my choice. People die every day because of choices made by men like Blackwood," Nantai said, joining the conversation. "You chose dignity. There is no shame in that." Elena looked around at these warriors who had risked everything for her. They could have stayed safe in their mountain strongholds, could have avoided this confrontation entirely. Instead, they had chosen to honor one man's debt to her dead husband and to uphold principles that transcended tribal boundaries. "What would happen if I surrendered?" she asked. "If I went back with them willingly?" "You would disappear," Naalnish said bluntly. "Men like Blackwood do not forgive humiliation. You know too much about his crimes." Elena knew he was right. She had seen what happened to Maria, the previous girl who had tried to escape Blackwood's control. There would be an accident, a convenient death that removed an inconvenient witness. "Then we fight," she said, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. Delche smiled grimly. "You sound like a Apache woman now." "Maybe I am," Elena replied. "Maybe that's what freedom means, choosing your own people instead of letting them be chosen for you." Naalnish nodded approvingly. Then we make plan. But first you must understand, after today there is no going back to your old life. You will be outlaw to your people, wanted by law. Elena thought about Mesquite Ridge, about the life she would be leaving behind, a life of servitude, of being owned and controlled by men who saw her as property. Then she thought about the respect in Naalnish's eyes, the dignity these Apache warriors had shown her, the possibility of a future where her choices were her own. "There's nothing to go back to," she said firmly. "My old life died with Thomas. What matters now is what I build next." The sound of approaching riders interrupted her thoughts. This time they were coming from multiple directions, closing in on the rocky outcropping like a net. "Time to go," Naalnish said, gathering his weapons. As they prepared to move, Elena felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. For months she had been powerless, pushed and pulled by forces beyond her control. Now facing an uncertain future with these unlikely allies, she finally felt like Elena Morrison again. Not a victim, but a woman capable of making her own destiny. The desert stretched endlessly before them, harsh and unforgiving, but also free. Behind them came the sound of pursuit, men who wanted to drag her back to a life of bondage and shame. But ahead lay the possibility of something she had thought lost forever: hope. Elena Morrison had chosen her side. Now she would discover what lay beyond the ridge, in a world where a woman's worth was measured not by her obedience, but by her courage to claim the freedom that should have been hers all along. As they rode into the setting sun, Elena didn't look back. There was nothing behind her worth seeing. Everything that mattered lay ahead, in the vast Arizona territory, where Apache and white, male and female, could perhaps find a way to judge each other, not by the color of their skin or the circumstances of their birth, but by the content of their character and the strength of their convictions. The chase was far from over, but Elena Morrison was finally, truly free.